So we'll begin. And we'll begin by thanking everyone that's on this call. We really appreciate that you took the time to learn more about what's going on with Nonviolent Peaceforce and what looks like our newest project in Cox Bazaar, Bangladesh, where we're assisting many families who have fled violence in Myanmar and now are just looking for a safe place to be in Bangladesh. With us, we have Nonviolent Peaceforce's Executive Director, Tiffany Easthom, and also the pleasure of having Shannon Radsky, who is our Program Manager in Bangladesh. And I want to thank them very much for joining us. It's the morning in the United States, but Tiffany is in the evening in Geneva, and even further later in the evening in Bangladesh is Shannon. So thank you both. So I'm just going to go right into some of the questions that we have for you about the program. And the first one is, how does the work in Bangladesh enhance our efforts to protect civilians in the region, and specifically our work, NP's work in Myanmar?
Great. This is Tiffany. I'll take that one. Hello, everybody, and thank you all for being here. So as I think you all know, we have a program in Myanmar, and prior to this particular crisis affecting the Rohingya community that started last August, we had already identified Bangladesh as a country that we would be interested in working in for a number of reasons, most significantly two key regions. One is it shares a border with Myanmar. So from a regional perspective, they are impacted by much the same, very similar regional dynamics, and share some of the same challenges, and are impacting and influencing each other's contexts. And then Bangladesh in and of itself, even prior to this current situation, has been identified by the International Crisis Group as one of the countries to pay close attention to in terms of its slide a little bit towards destabilization and some early warning signs of potential, the potentiality for the outbreak of violent conflict. So we had already been thinking about Bangladesh as a potential expansion area when the crisis kicked off in August and September of last year, that started the mass movement of people, of the Rohingya people fleeing violence across that border. And then from there, what really happened is the civil society group that we were working with, the Rohingya civil society group that we were working with inside Myanmar, we worked together with them and agreed to go together to Bangladesh to conduct the first of what would be a series of assessments and familiarization visits to figure out what, if anything, could our two respective organizations do to be able to support and contribute towards the situation, improving the situation for the population coming across the border. So that kicked off a period of a couple of months of back and forth visits. Representatives from our team in Myanmar first went. We pulled other colleagues in from other parts of the organization to be able to go and to continue on until finally we were able to really have Shannon and other colleagues, Shannon as our sort of core constant, and other colleagues on the ground to be able to really start doing direct implementation. So that's where we are now, and sort of really looking at it as it is very clearly a regional issue, and they're a porous border and a mutually reinforcing situation. So it makes a lot of sense as it relates to the way NP works from a nonpartisan perspective and trying to be on really understanding and engaging with all parties to conflicts and situations like this, an opportunity to do so at an international border level.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's helpful. I wanted to ask also, could you describe the unique contribution that NP offers in the camp in Bangladesh?
And I think we should turn it over to Shannon, who is spending her days there right now.
Great. Thank you.
going to ask, should I take that? I actually, before answering that question, I was wondering if it'd be okay if I could paint or illustrate the situation here a little bit more.
Oh, sure.
Because I think if nothing else, I hope that tonight we can best illustrate what's going on the ground and really emphasize the magnitude of the ongoing crisis and what the current rains that are starting in Bangladesh really mean going forward in the next couple of months. But I promise I will answer that question. But I did.
Sure.
I wanted to emphasize a few things, and I'm not one for stats or statistics, and Tiffany knows that pretty well. I usually dive into just illustrations, but to really impress upon those that are participating in the discussion tonight, this is the world's largest refugee camp, and I don't think that can be understated. There are, at this point, more than 886, almost 887,000 refugees just in this area of Bangladesh alone, and over 693,000 have arrived since August of last year. Now, of that 887,000 number, only 4%, so only 33,000, about 900, are actually registered refugees. That means that the vast majority of those of Rohingya that have come from last year's crisis, they're not only unrecognized as refugees, it's the magnitude, it has layers to it, right? And that means something that they're not registered. Within the camp, or the mega site, as I refer to it here, where I've been working on a daily basis, there's about 608,800 inhabitants just living in that gigantic mega site alone. And it's I think, just to give you a better idea, the mega site, it's between 2,000 and 3,000 acres large. Of that, about 17%, or over 103,000, are children living under the age of 5. So in this gigantic mega site of approximately 2,000 to 3,000 acres, you've got essentially an enormous city of small children. The second, it kind of makes other refugee camps across the globe pale in comparison to scale. And that's one of the biggest things about this particular crisis, is that it's about scale. Everything is en masse. So in terms of what NP can bring, what's our unique contribution? To be quite honest, it's reminding people of humanity and dignity, and not just protection, but core humanitarian principles during the humanitarian response. Because it's so large scale, and because the crisis is so massive, and because humanitarian agencies across the board are panicked about what monsoon season could do, what rains could do, there is just sincerely a constant air of panic. And with panic comes chaos, and comes fast movement even in response. And we can often allow ourselves to forget that, even in something like I've been doing today, I was working on an emergency relocation of families that were in landslide areas of the camp, and their shelters were destroyed, and they needed to be moved to the newly constructed extension area where there's safe space, basically. Even in the mobilization of these families early in the morning, humanitarians are the core idea, the premise behind it is to move them to safety, and as quickly as possible before the rains come. And so there's anxiety in that interaction, and often the way that Rohingya are being engaged, even by the best of humanitarians, can come across as curt. It can come across as anxious and if not done carefully, if not done sensitively, it can cause re-traumatization. And I've been seeing that on a daily basis. And I'm only one person, or we're small, but we're coordinating with many different actors. And what I do on a daily basis is literally hold the hand of the other humanitarians on the ground and remind them that we need to take a second, take a breath, and step into the shoes of the Rohingya that we are engaging with on a daily basis, and remember that we cannot be forcing things too quickly. We cannot be pushing too quickly. We have to be compassionate all the way through, and it's hard. I will tell you, it is very hard because the stakes are so high here. I mean, I'm going to kind of just go into some more points, I think. The last week has been especially rough in this part of Bangladesh. As many of you have probably read, the rains have started. They were delayed a bit. In fact, at this point, we're supposed to be in the middle of monsoon season, or the first monsoon season in Bangladesh, supposedly. But actually, they were quite delayed. And it had been extremely hot for the last few months. But finally, the rain started. And in Bangladesh, there's a series or a way of categorizing the strength of the storm or the strength of the rains, and it goes from 1 to 3. And 1 is just a very heavy storm, very heavy rainstorm. 2 escalates to monsoon. 3, you're talking about cyclone and beyond. And this week didn't even reach Category 1, so it wasn't even considered a strong storm. And yet, the 3-4 plus days of what is probably considered mild to moderate inundation moderate rainfall caused huge levels of inundation throughout the riskiest areas of the camps. So it's been a rough week, and there's been a lot of push for these emergency relocations. There's been a lot of work over the course of the last, since February, I believe, to consistently engage communities throughout the mega site that are in the highest, riskiest areas of the camp. These are areas that different United Nations agencies, as well as different NGOs non-governmental organizations have been consistently assessing in order to understand how strong the topography is, given all of the infrastructure that's been installed in this large swath of land, given the massive deforestation, given all of the services that have been put in place. And in February, I think the estimation that was about 100,000 people were at risk of being drastically affected by landslide and flooding. By May, that number had escalated to increased to about 250,000. And what we saw even this week, it's likely much larger than that. And we've been targeting those households that are literally either they've been completely covered by landslide, or they are on the verge of collapse, or they are just about to go, and working with these families who have resisted moving. Again, there's been attempts since February to speak to communities within the camp to try to encourage them to take precautionary measures to move out to safer areas before the rain started. But there's a lot of pushback, and there's a lot of fear of not having access to the same services that they receive where they currently are. A lot of fear of possible insecurity, whether it's with elephants or with just any sort of violence that could be on the outside of the camp, or the edge, sort of different part of the camp. And there's also, just to be quite frank, a lot of trauma, and a lot of people who fled from Myanmar, took months to build up and fortify the shelter that they had, and then they're being asked to uproot themselves. And NPs played a role in trying to ensure that these families are engaged, properly engaged, and it's a discussion on the risks. And it's, families are presented with a choice. and they're not being forced. And it's not to say that other humanitarian actors aren't doing that, and that's not to say that those that are really at the forefront of these activities aren't doing that or don't have that as their core mission. But again, because it's so large scale and because the pressure is so large and because the risks are so high, it's easy sometimes to forget that we are all humans and we need to be compassionate, we need to be sensitive, and we need to understand and empathize with what the Rohingya are going through, as well as the Bangladeshi community that has received them. Now, there's been a huge amount of it's been a huge strain on the community. I mean, massive, inexplicable. And the Bangladeshi community welcomed Rohingya during the influx last year, arms open and sort of no hesitation. But after 6 and 8 months, it's getting harder and harder and harder to maintain even a semblance of peaceful coexistence, because there are less and less resources to share, because jobs, the socioeconomic landscape of the Bangladeshi side of everything is just completely deteriorated. People are suffering as well. So what can NP do? Like our mandate revolves around peaceful coexistence, right? Protection, peaceful coexistence, community-based protection mechanisms. This particular context is uniquely suited for the type of work that we do, because we could be assisting in building bridges across not only the demographics like Rohingya and Bangladeshi, but within each. There are layers of it. There are the registered refugees that have been in this area for decades. There are the layers of different Bangladeshi indigenous tribes that have also had presence in this area, and they're living on the lower end of the totem pole. Let's say that they've had less access to resources for longer periods of time than anyone else. There are new arrivals. It's just a melting pot of people and of issues and of conflicts and of violence, and a lot of the NGOs. Now there are many NGO non-governmental organizations. There is a huge presence here of other actors, but they're also focusing on their unique interventions, and they may be only able to target one group. We have the ability to build relationships across different geographic points, across different groups, and that's what makes me excited about being here. That's what makes me excited about the potential for NP itself to establish a presence here, because I see a need for the unique type of work that we do that is different from what other protection agencies do and offer. Mm-hmm. I'm going on and on. I'm so sorry.
No, but it's very informative, Shannon, and we do. Yeah. And I asked you the question, and you gave us the answer. That's really helpful, and it does give a better understanding of what's going on. And it kind of leads me to my next question, which is, once NP has more people on the ground, what do you think a typical day will look like for their work?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of phases to this. So right now, because we've had small presence, we've actually spent quite a lot of time building partnerships with other agencies and other actors. We have a partnership with the Rohingya-based network that Tiffany actually referenced. So the civil society organization that NP is very well connected with in Myanmar. During the outflux last year, members of that particular organization came to Bangladesh in the outflux. So they are actually living inside of the mega site itself. And very quickly, they built their own network on the ground. And it's completely Rohingya refugee-based inside of this camp, which you would think is not so unique. You would think that given it's such a large camp and there are so many people there, they'd be able to easily mobilize into groups and into their own small projects. But the way that the humanitarian response and the way that the response is sort of taking part here in general, there's quite a lot of employment of Bangladeshi national staff into different agencies, and they're coming in and working in the camp with the Rohingya, maybe volunteers, and it's a mixed bag. So I'm trying to emphasize that this particular network, it's almost the most pure, like, organic sense of a community network inside of the camp. And they are a civil society network, but they are trying to learn more about protection, community-based protection, humanitarianism in general, and that's sort of where we stepped in. As soon as I got here, we discussed how can we build their capacity on the ground through through workshops, through different things, mentoring that I could provide on relationship building, on referrals, on different things that NP is known for doing in other contexts. We have connection with them. We also have a relationship with one of the largest actors on the ground right now, the International Organization for Migration, which many of you might have read about or will read about. They and the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, or the Refugee Agency, are the largest actors out here. They're providing, you call it sort of camp management. They're the ones that are responsible for shelter and making a degree of security and coordination to make sure that the Rohingya, the camps where they are being settled, are managed and are provided with sufficient services so that Rohingya can live in not just survival mode, but in a more dignified manner. Anyway, we have a relationship with both the Rohingya-based civil society network, and we have a relationship with one of the largest actors. And we're talking about how do we bridge these two together. We're assisting linking that network into coordination on the ground in these camps, which looks like, if this network comes across cases of pregnant women that are having huge issues accessing medical facilities, and they're growing closer and closer to actually giving birth, then we can advocate together to the medical facilities on how do we make the services more accessible. Can they do outreach? Can there be mobile medical teams? The network, the Rohingya-based network, can also, they're living on the ground. They're living in these communities. They know what's going on so intimately well that they'll know if there's insecurity in certain areas, if young girls are being harassed, if young boys or young men who are having to walk kilometers, hours outside of the camp to get to collect firewood for fuel, if they are being harassed or threatened or extorted for anything. And then they can advocate these types of information to me. I can funnel it to the larger partners, and I can funnel it into different discussions that are going on at the Cox Bazaar level, the district level, as well as the sub-district level. And these big concerns can be brought forward and addressed by the humanitarian actors and the state, who are supposed to be providing a semblance of security. If we can get more people here, that just means more of that can happen. There can be more NP presence in the camp itself during these emergency relocations to do a lot of what I previously mentioned. There will be NP training, general sort of the new staff of the larger partner, International Organization for Migration. They're hiring more and more staff to come on as we call them like protection officers, or people that will be engaged on the ground with the different community groups. We will have the opportunity to directly train them as soon as they are onboarding onto the organization, and we will get to provide an entire curriculum of unarmed civilian protection, which, to be perfectly honest, is something I'm extremely excited about, because that means from day one we can talk to very fresh people about what empathy means and what it means to be what community means and what it means to be sensitively engaging and proactively engaging with the different groups on the ground. Now that's sort of the phase that we're kind of in, right? That's because I'm here on the ground. If the second phase and what would really propel NP forward is being able to capitalize on more of these linkages and then expand on specifically host and refugee relations. There are so many opportunities to be focusing on providing safe space just for dialogue between groups on the ground, and they're not happening. It's not happening. And it's not happening yet because everyone's responding to the emergency. But the longer that this camp and the longer that this crisis remains here, the more likely that tensions and conflicts and violence will arise between the sort of, we call it host and refugee, or the Bangladeshi and Rohingya demographics. And by having NP here now, by having our presence during the emergency, by being able to build preliminary relationships with actors like the military or the district level district commissioner's office and local community-based organizations that focus on the prevention of violent extremism, and local organizations that focus on youth mobilization and empowerment, and local women's groups on the Bangladeshi side, as well as building all of these key relationships inside of the refugee zones. We're going to be uniquely suited to do a lot of dialogue and a lot of cross-cutting collaborative programming, and we'll be able to help sort of educate the other actors and the other agencies and the other, especially national non-governmental organizations here that would want to participate in like-minded or similar activities. So,
wow, that's Shannon. That is so exciting. Yeah. I'm so pleased to hear about all of this. I am going to wrap up because we want to give some time to our audience to ask. But I'll ask one last question to either of you, and maybe you can let me know if there's one thing that you want people to know about the refugee crisis in Bangladesh. What would it be? Shannon, it sounds like you've expressed quite a bit on that. I don't know if Tiffany has anything that she wants to add. But if there's one thing that you felt like you've left out, now would be the time to share it, or we could just turn it over to the questions of our audience as well.
Shannon, do you have anything else?
No, I was waiting. Sorry.
That was very thorough.
I think
I was waiting. I was waiting for Tiffany. Okay. One very, very quick thing. I want to say this. One very, very quick thing. There isn't a huge amount of international people on the ground in these camps, right? And that might be happening for a number of reasons, whatever. But as one of the few internationals that's consistently in that camp, the resiliency that I've seen on the day-to-day is pretty astounding. These relocations that I've been participating in for months now, but especially in the last few days, they're not from one place to 500 meters away. They are across this camp. That means dismantling a shelter in an hour, packing all of your things in another hour, taking potentially yourself, if it's myself, 30-year-old woman with maybe my husband and my myriad children under the age of 4, and walking them 4, 5, 6 kilometers in the rain. on Monday, I participated in a relocation, and I was with a woman who had 3 children in that situation, newborn baby, 1 child, 1.5 years old, 1 child, maybe 3. It was raining. She was crying. She was upset. She was scared of the rain. She was scared of the conditions of the camp because they are deteriorating with the amount of rainfall that's happening. But she still trudged on. All I could really do to support her was carry her middle child. I carried her 1.5-year-old child for the better part of that 5 kilometers. And, you know, it's astounding.
Shannon, did you say you're up knees in water too?
Yeah, I could share pictures with you with there are footpaths that people are traversing on a daily basis that are more or less suitable, but the more that it rains, the deeper it's going to get. And there are parts where the mud goes up to your knees, goes up to your thighs. You know, it'll dry in a matter of an hour or 2 when it's actually sunny out. But it's becoming a very intense. It was already an intense place to live. It's becoming an even more intense conditions. Yeah.
And just if you haven't had a chance to do so, if you go to Nonviolent Peaceforce's Facebook page, over the last couple of days, there's been a video and some photos posted of the conditions of the camp now, so you can kind of get a visual, if you haven't seen them already, what Shannon's talking about. And just to add, so from the big picture perspective, I would say 2 key messages. This is a long-term situation. As Shannon said, this is the largest refugee camp in the world, and what we certainly know from our work in conflict areas around the world is displacement, if not corrected very, very quickly, if people are not able to return home really within a matter of days or weeks, statistically becomes protracted displacement very quickly. This is a huge number of people, and it is not safe for them to go home yet. So it is a long-term engagement. This initial attention will start to wane, and then this is just going to be a protracted crisis for a million people. And then the other thing I wanted to say was just on the advocacy piece is that what we have seen on the ground, and we really see this on the Myanmar side, is that really aggressive shame and blame advocacy is not working. So very aggressive calling out of Aung San Suu Kyi and of these governments. Culturally, I mean, this is true everywhere, but really in this part of the world, that is one of the least helpful approaches that can happen. It becomes extremely polarizing, and the authorities become even more deeply entrenched in their positions. It is an incredibly complex geopolitical intersection of the world. It is much more complicated than simply, what it appears to be on the surface when you think of all the power players in the area. So when you hear things in the news of people are going to be returning home, an agreement has been signed, that a lot of that is lip service. It's political games being played between governments and UN agencies to try and to save face and to move forward. But just be rest assured this is going to be a very long displacement.
Yeah. Thank you, Tiffany, and thank you, Shannon. Thank you both so much. I think we should open up, to questions from our folks who've joined us. I think that's only fair. But thank you so much for everything you've shared. It's so helpful. I'm so proud of you and so pleased that we're doing this work. So any questions? If you want to ask a question, the way you can unmute yourself is to press *6. If you press *6, the rest of us will be able to hear you, and you can ask Shannon or Tiffany your question. We'll give you a little bit of time because we know it takes a little while to unmute. But if there are any questions, now would be the time.
Just to repeat, press *6 to ask your question.
Hi, this is David Hartso. Thanks so much for what you're doing. I had heard a report or a rumor that there had been an agreement that the Rohingya or some of them could go back home but they had said they would only go if they were accompanied by internationals. And I was just interested in hearing more whether that's at all accurate and whether that's something that might actually be able to happen.
Can I take this one, Tiff?
Yep,
So there is truth in that there has been the United Nations has signed an agreement with both the Myanmar government and the Bangladeshi government on a sort of repatriation plan, but it includes a significant significant improvement of conditions in Rakhine State itself first, before the idea of mobilizing refugees to return. And it does include establishing sort of like transit sites or transit centers, and that would, I believe, they're supposed to be created or constructed by the UN Agency for Refugees. Now, part of that, forgive me, I haven't read the whole thing. This is just what I understand from colleagues that have been sort of educating me on it here. The big part of that agreement is that the conditions in Rakhine State have to be conducive to peaceful social cohesion, peaceful coexistence. Excuse me, can't speak anymore. Peaceful coexistence, meaning return of certain services, because mind you, in the last year, let alone the last few years, there's been a depletion of medical services, of health, education, of myriad things. So they would have to increase and open up, Myanmar government would have to open back up the access of a lot of agencies and a lot of infrastructure to come into the state to improve the conditions, as well as guarantee a pathway to citizenship or a pathway to recognition. And I had not heard about the accompaniment part, but I would not doubt that. And I think that could be, if the conditions were such that people could and should safely return, facilitating larger scale safe accompaniment would make the most sense. Because, to be quite frank, I have not heard any Rohingya, any refugees wanting to return. They do not want to return, especially if they are not granted citizenship. The conditions that Rohingya have been living in Rakhine State for a long time, decades, are deplorable. And the conditions in these camps are also deplorable. But at least in these camps, there is a level of free speech. There is a level of community mobilization that can happen. There's a level of there's an air or an appetite for activism without reprisals necessarily. I mean, the rumor mongering around forced repatriation, especially in January, February, and March, was huge, and I've seen it diminish a bit, but it's always in the background that there could be a potential for forced repatriation. So people take it very seriously. But that's also where NP's work with accompaniment, NP's work with direct protection. We would have the opportunity in these next months, in these next years, while this crisis is ongoing, to influence, especially the larger actors that are involved with this possible repatriation plan.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Hi, Shannon. This is Julie Warner in St. Paul. I wonder if you would say a little bit more about the Rohingya-based network in the camp. Are they working across the border between Myanmar and Bangladesh at all, or are they working only in the camp right now? And I'm curious to know a little bit more about their daily activities. I realize that could be a book, but I wonder if you could just go in and give us a little bit more detail about what they're doing. Thank you.
I'll give you a little bit of detail. I'm not the best person to speak on their behalf because I'm not working with them every day, but I will give you what I understand and what I know from my interactions with them. So, one, they are not working across border because predominantly because there's restricted movement. There's massive restricted movement across the district, but especially across the sub-districts where where the mega site is. Limited by the military's presence, limited by local police as well. Now, it's a huge area, it's pretty porous, so people can move about, but in general, there's restricted movement. On the day-to-day, so at this point, I think they have more than 100, definitely more than 100 core volunteers, and I think that their network spans beyond that. They live and work across this entire megasite. They have at least a little bit of presence, more or less everywhere. They are at the root of it about community mobilization and community engagement, and they have split their network into sort of, I think, 4 or 5 different kind of themes. Like they have one group that works on health promotion predominantly, and then they'll do many other things, but predominantly health promotion. They have one group that is like a research-based, and so because they are fairly well established and because of their reputation in Myanmar and their credibility, they've had a number of different outside actors come to them and look to them for support in running many of the most recent surveys and research projects on the camp since August. They also have a women's peace. They're also, mind you, they're all called peace builders. All right, they're all called peace builders. They're not called volunteers, or they are peace builders. They have a women's peace builder team, which is awesome. It's really awesome. I could go on and on about the dynamics for women and girls in this particular site, but I'll leave it at the fact that it is really awesome that there's a group of women and girls that can meet regularly and that are growing to become outspoken and that are growing to become really key facilitators and wanting to be facilitators. That's phenomenal. And then there's another group that is I believe linked into sort of a medical ambulatory sort of response in some areas of the camp. And then the final group that I've been working closely with for the better part of the last 2 months is they call themselves their emergency peace building team, or they're their emergency team. And their sort of mini mandate revolves around early warning messaging and emergency preparedness. And so we've been spending a lot of time building their capacity in early warning and early response, which is, arguably more often used in conflict displacement, but there are elements of it that cross over into what's going on here, which is a mixture of conflict and natural disaster. And then household level emergency preparedness. So talking at household level and talking at the sort of miniature block and neighborhood level to families about what they should do to prepare in case they have to flee from the shelter, or they're forced to leave from their shelter for temporarily because of deleterious weather or any other crisis, or alternatively if they're stuck in their shelter for a few days on end because of the massive rain. So emergency kits, emergency communication networks, how can they spread information and just spread key messages, key information between groups when telecommunication networks are cut down, or safe movement. How can we work with families on ensuring that if they have to move temporarily and say they have many small children, or they have family members with physical disabilities and they cannot move easily, or they have elderly family members, how do they move safely in a way where they are not separated or lost or forced to leave anybody behind? So I know that on a day-to-day, they're running, at least that team is running different discussions at the household and community level. They're doing risk mapping exercises that we've recently been working with them on, and action planning. So actually at the community level, drawing up core plans for this is what we're going to do as a community if crisis strikes. which is great because there's so many different larger scale efforts going on between the military and different humanitarian actors to try to respond to the monsoon and try to prepare and respond. But it's so higher level it's like top level engagement, and it's large scale intervention that it doesn't grant the community-based focus. Right, and so these guys are really focusing in on the community-based focus.
Can I just do a quick follow-up to that? Just for all of you who know us well, NP, I mean, this organization this is one of the ideal outcomes of some of our engagement in terms of primacy of the local actor and really supporting community, the development of local peace infrastructure. This organization started as one person in Yangon who came and got connected, attended a training that NP gave, got connected with the NP team in Myanmar, and then he really had a vision of forming a civil society organization in Myanmar, really primarily populated by Rohingya people, to demonstrate what Rohingya could contribute to, that they were not just an other group, but they were a positive contributor to Myanmar writ large. And so NP started working really closely with this group and supporting them in Myanmar, and they started to grow. And then they were the organization that we did the initial assessments with together. And now they have over 100 people on their team in Bangladesh in the camp. So it's a really positive success story in terms of supporting a local partner to really get its feet underneath them. And they're doing very, very positive work. And they have the woman who's now their program manager, the senior program manager, worked for us in Myanmar. So there's been that continuity, and we continue to work with their Myanmar side of their team in Yangon. So Hubie, our head of mission, and the team there is still working with the CSI on the Myanmar side as well.
Thank you, Shannon and Tiffany, for that detail. Really appreciate it.
Great.
That's great. Well, we're coming up close to our end of our call. We might have time for another quick question if there is one. Now would be the time to ask it. If questions do come to you later, please feel free to send them our way, and we will try to find answers for you if nothing comes to your mind right now. But if anybody has a quick question, the last question, now will be the time to state it.
This is Anwar. I'm just wondering how many NP staff are there?
Shannon?
Just me right now. I am. I hope you're doing well, Anne. So I had a team. No, there's technically two. I do have a Bangladeshi teammate, colleague, but it's just the two of us for right now.
Uh-huh.
And we've got two more coming in. And the way that we are operating right now in Bangladesh is that we are working in partnership with the International Organization for Migration, who has effectively seconded NP staff so that they can work as NP staff, but under the umbrella of IOM, the International Organization for Migration. And this has allowed us to move more quickly because establishing the legal registration and meeting all the legal compliance for setting up a full-fledged, what we would normally see our country programs look like in Bangladesh just takes a really, really long time because it's a very bureaucratically heavy environment. So we're working that way for now so that we can be immediately serving, and we finally sort of just worked out an operational model with them. And then we will, the next stage, what we're hoping to be able to do is to actually set up a full-fledged country program that would address not only the Rohingya response, but also what I spoke about in the introduction, sort of the broader conflict dynamics within Bangladesh itself.
Great. Thank you so much for that explanation. And I appreciate the questions that everyone had for us. And I will remind you again that if more questions come to your mind later on, please do send them our way, and we'll do our best to get you those answers. But I just want to take a moment to thank Tiffany, Shannon, and all of you that took your time to be on this call. And I hope you were inspired by what you heard. I know I was. And I would like to remind you that you made this work possible. Your support, your volunteering, telling folks about Nonviolent Peaceforce, you're making Nonviolent Peaceforce, and you're helping us reach the people, the vulnerable civilians around the world. You're making that happen. So I know we get a lot of support from a lot of large organizations, but it is the individuals who want this to be a reality in the world, that want to see safer civilians, that want to promote peace,